Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. It is actually the day before Thanksgiving, 2021, and our guest this evening is Mr. Evan Belansky. Hopefully I'm going to get your title right.
Sure.
I'm not sure I got it right the last time. Who is Chelmsford's Director of Community Development.
There you go. Let's go with that.
Is that close?
That's good enough.
Okay, close enough. All right.
Been called other things. That's good.
Yes, as have we all. Anyone who served in any capacity in the town has been called many things. So what we usually do is first minute or so of the show, we just ask our guests to give just a very, very brief biographical sketch, just so that people know who we're talking to, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Sure, great. Well, thanks for having me back. I think it was probably a month or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. So as you said, I'm the Community Development Director for the town of Chelmsford. I've been with the town approximately 15 years. I went to school for planning degrees, and I have over 20 years of experience, as I mentioned, a little over 15 with the town in this current capacity, and that's serving as a technical and administrative roles for regulatory boards such as the Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, provide oversight to the Conservation Agent, and a variety of other boards and committees, Housing Advisory Board, Economic Development Commission, in an attempt to assist the town in identifying its goals and objectives and then implementing strategies to achieve those goals and objectives.
And also, you play a very large role. If there are zoning changes that are recommended by Planning Board, you would bring those to town meeting. You would generally be the one to present those to town meeting.
I have been, yes, in the past.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good brief description of your duties, and certainly many, many years in the business, as they say. One thing that I'm very interested in having you talk a little bit about is your specific role in the town as far as development projects are concerned, because I just find, I've been in town politics now for almost 25 years, and I talk to people all the time. And there just seems to be a lot of confusion and general misunderstanding about the town's role in general as far as projects being implemented in town, developers buying land and wanting to do projects and so forth. There seems to be a thought that there's this urge by town administration to quote unquote urbanize the town and take over every square foot of undeveloped land and put some buildings on it, because this is how we get tax revenue. And the town manager, you and others in town, folks on the Planning Board and even people on the Zoning Board of Appeals, I think in many cases have been, I think, unfairly maligned, criticized for having a pro-development at all costs mentality. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let you expand upon that.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question, and I've this has been on top of my mind for quite some time. I'm well aware of the public sentiment. I follow Facebook. I occasionally will comment and try to provide facts and clarifications. I think recent incarnations of the Planning Board are well aware of those sentiments, and unfortunately some members may share those sentiments. From my perspective, personally and professionally, I've attempted to correct the record on Facebook many, many times. Unfortunately, that sentiment is misinformed, it's misguided, and it's damaging as far as I'm concerned. Damaging in the sense that it has created a false narrative, one that unfortunately there doesn't appear to be any attempt by the town, however you want to define that, appointed elected officials, people who are responsible in their capacity to review and approve development, make goals and objectives to correct the record. And that false narrative, in my opinion, is pretty solidified and continues to be perpetuated. So based upon that, over my 15 years here, I have expressed to the planning board and others that the way I have gone about my business and serving the town, particularly development review projects, has changed. And I will continue to change based upon the circumstances that are presented to me. So that public sentiment, as I said, I think is more than a public sentiment at this point. I think elections have consequences, and you've seen, at least with the recent elections, the elected planning board's attitude or perspective related to development has changed. Meanwhile, the zoning remains the same, the master plan remains the same. So there's a disconnect, as far as I'm concerned, between what the policy documents say and what the current incarnation of the planning board believes is the vision of the town. With that all being said, it's clear that the vision of the town is changing on the fly. I'm not sure the town understands or knows what it wants to be, which is a bit puzzling to me, because other than the 12 or 15 40B mushrooms that have been developed over the last 20 years, physically not much has changed. So I think the town is at a crossroads, literally, not physically, but literally trying to figure out what it wants to be, even though it's a mature suburban built-out community, which has led to the select board creating a goal of a growth strategy, a development strategy, which I'm not sure anyone really understands what that is about. The planning board is in the process of finalizing the 2020 master plan update. It doesn't really say much other than that the planning board should review everything that's been done over the last decade. So for me, it's an interesting dynamic as to how what the town and the planning board expect of paid professional staff. I'm here to serve in the best of my capacity. And continue to assist the town in identifying its goals and objectives and implementing those goals and objectives. But it's quite clear that there's a clear disconnect between what the zoning says, what the strategies were coming out of the 2010 master plan, all of which were implemented via town meeting votes and overlays and things of that nature. And then within the last couple of years via elections, it seems like all of that's been kind of put on hold and questioned. So I've said a lot.
But this is not unique to Chelmsford. I mean, I think you see the same dynamic in other communities as well, where people become, I guess, for lack of a better term, maybe the word is alarmed, when they see open spaces taken over by development and so forth. I think there's a huge disconnect between what the public perceives the power of a planning board or a select board or a zoning board of appeals can do versus what they can actually do to facilitate or limit the types of development. And again, I hate to go back to Facebook and use that as a gauge because, I mean, is it 15 people? Is it 300? Who knows, okay? So you really don't know if that's reflecting an accurate reflection of the sentiment of the community. But I read comments like, well, the planning board shouldn't allow this development. And the first thing I say is, well, as the developer, done everything he's supposed to do legally. And if the answer is yes, how much can the planning board do to limit whatever the proposed development is?
Sure. So most of the development, other than the 40Bs, which the planning board has nothing to do with, that's a zoning board process. But most of the other multifamily developments, particularly in the center, 104 Turnpike, 241 Littleton Road, those were approved via the overlays. The town meeting adopted, and it requires a special permit from the planning board. So under mass law, special permits have significant discretion by the permitting authority, being the planning board. So those overlays were designed to be flexible, to have a negotiation to achieve the best project for that particular site within that particular neighborhood, understanding that other zoning options may be less preferred. And that's exactly how all those projects played out. But to answer your question directly, because it's a special permit, the planning board has 100% discretionary authority. There is no compliance with the bylaw because the bylaw is drafted to provide flexibility to allow projects to be basically designed within the context that they're located in. So most recently, the redevelopment of the Santander parking lot and the Oddfellows, while it substantially complied, there were several provisions that the planning board viewed as fairly important, number of units, total height. And as I mentioned, under the special permit, the board legally has full discretion to deny those projects. The disconnect comes in related to the spirit and intent of the overlay as it aligns with the strategic goals and objectives of the Center Village Master Plan, and understanding that development is expensive, redevelopment is even more expensive. And so the reason that projects were proposed of those scope and scale is to, one, reflect the economic realities, and two, obviously, to reflect a profit margin that a developer is seeking. And so, yes, to answer your question, the board has the legal authority to use their discretion to deny. In years past, in former planning boards, going back to Ann McGuigan times, she was an attorney, and she would remind the board that it's not only if it complies we must approve, regardless of whether we like it or not, but there were instances, such as a special permit, where Ann and other former planning board members would attempt to educate fellow board members in the public at large that it's also a reasonable discretionary decision based upon goals and objectives, based upon the spirit and intent of the overlay, and a give and take via a special permit process. So as I said on the outset, a lot has changed, particularly over the last couple of years. I'm not certain how the planning board or the community views zoning in general. Again, I think the general public sentiment is a distrust in the overlays, primarily due to the fact that they are open-ended. They're flexible in nature, and I think a lot of that flexibility has been viewed as a tool to result in projects that shouldn't be proposed, never mind approved.
Well, now you've just made a very important comment, because I always draw the distinction between a developer's right to bring forth a project and have it discussed, and then whether or not it gets approved. That's obviously part of the process. But I guess I would have a hard time accepting the notion that it shouldn't even be discussed. People shouldn't even bring their projects forward.
Yeah.
If I buy a piece of property and I feel that it's suitable for a certain project, and I take a look at the zoning and the bylaws and I say, well, I could make such and such work, it needs a minor tweak, which might be a special permit, then I would come to you and I'd say, what do you think? I mean, is this reasonable? Am I on the right track? Am I on the wrong track? Now, if I do that, what kind of advice are you going to give me?
Great question. So I've learned over the years to basically say that none of this is about me. People find that hard to believe. People think that I'm going back to Facebook and so forth.
What dog do you have in the fight?
Right. Right. And I've heard, I've seen all the comments on Facebook. I've attempted to address those. I've heard editorial comments from planning board members. So it's not a sentiment, it's a reality at this point, ranging from I'm a development director, I'm a politician, I have an agenda and I'm trying to push an agenda because it's related to my performance review. Those are all rather silly. The fact of the matter is Chelmsford has an elected planning board. And so those 7 members are the chief elected planners in town. They decide, it's their agenda, they're making the decisions. And I mention that because that's my position at this point. As I said, I'm changing on the fly as I see reasonable and appropriate. Years past, developers, proponents, investors would come to me. They'd have ideas. I would give them reasonable advice based upon past experiences with the planning board. And more often than not, those projects would be well received. They'd get approval and so forth and so on. More recently, my advice is that it requires a special permit. A lot has changed. In some cases, I'll say it's ambitious. But as you said, those proponents and investors have the legal right to make those proposals. It's not my role, and I've said this publicly to the planning board, you don't want me or any other paid staff in town hall to have the power to tell someone no. In other words, you don't want me or any other town official preventing a private investor to state their case in front of the appropriate board in town, such as the elected planning board. If I or any other staff were doing that, eventually someone who you knew or had a business relationship with would be told no, and that wouldn't go over well. So, I think it took me a while, and I think I fully understand and appreciate the fact that Chelmsford has an elected planning board. And my role at this point is I do provide initial feedback and guidance. It's fairly generic at this point, whether we're talking about Grist Mill 2, whether we're talking about what's happening on River Neck Road, or what's happening at UMass West. It's all fairly vanilla and fairly generic because I'm not really sure, and I don't have a good feel or understanding for what the planning board is looking for on a project by project basis. The neighborhoods, I think, are still trying to figure out what kind of projects they want. And as I said, it's not about me. I mentioned to you earlier, we're finishing up a 2020 master plan update. Select board have the development growth strategy that's floating out there. So I think the community acknowledges that they don't know what they want to be, and they want to figure it out on the fly. So that leaves the development review process a bit challenging, so to speak. I'm not in a position to give any clear advice at this point.
Well, let me ask you a question because I really don't know the answer. You talked about a select board vision or policy for growth strategy and development. Is that a normal thing for a select board to do, or given the fact that we have an elected planning board, wouldn't that more correctly fall under their purview? Am I not understanding something?
It's a good question. Again, my understanding of that particular goal or objective was that the town manager had put that on the table as something that may be needed and worthwhile. The select board had clearly codified that. After the fact, members of the select board and town manager did appear before the planning board and updated them accordingly. But you make a good point. I think there's a disconnect as to who's driving the ship and who's creating the policies.
Would it be different? And I'm not saying I'm advocating for this, but just as a what if, would it be different? Would the dynamic be different if we had an appointed planning board, as they do in many suburban communities?
It's difficult to say. I know things would be very different. Politically, I think it'd be very difficult to make a logical argument to change elected planning board.
Well, I don't ever see that changing.
Yeah, I did work for an appointed planning board in Danvers for 5 years. It's completely different.
And it depends on who the appointing authority is, too.
Yeah, Danvers was a strong town manager, so very similar to Chelmsford. It's more predictable, but you have to have buy-in from a bottom up, top down.
Right.
I will say that I think the development process is less political. It has a likelihood of being politically motivated and driven if it's appointed. But as I said, I arrived here 15 years ago. It was the first time working for an elected planning board. It did take me a couple of years to fully understand and appreciate that dynamic. I think it's kind of evolved to the extreme over the last couple of elections, where the way Chelmsford had historically done business related to development review, I think has changed. I just explained to you how I've changed. I'm not suggesting that's for the better, but I think development, however you define it, at this point is likely a dirty word. And I'm not sure neighborhoods, want any development, which, leads back to the growth strategy and development strategy, bringing in school committee, finance committee, planning board, select board.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing. You and I have talked about, at EDC, Chelmsford very rarely has an opportunity to discuss anything in an intelligent, forum where you can exchange facts and ideas. Maybe this growth development strategy serves that capacity. As I said, it's not about me. I have no agenda. I have no role. If I arrived here 15 years ago and the 2010 master plan, talked about ratcheting everything back and keeping everything, quaint, suburban, rural, that's what we would have done. The fact of the matter is the 2010 master plan, led by Jim Lane and others, it had a very clear vision. It was very strategic. It was talking about redevelopment and getting 129 back to its heyday.
My personal belief is that they did good work and it was a good document, and it made sense for the size and the scope of the community at the time, and it recognized our spatial problems as well.
So that document was so well thought out and strategically written that from 2011 to 2016, myself working with the Planning Board, Housing Advisory Board, EDC, and ultimately town meeting, we implemented all those zoning,
That's right.
all those zoning objectives. So I don't know if it's a case of success breeds content. But clearly, the public sentiment and the elections indicate that people don't like the trend or the course that zoning and physical development was on.
And if that's the case, then I think we need to make sure that everything that aligns with that is changed to align with that. It would be one thing if it was one election cycle in 1 or 2 years, but if it's been 5 or 6 years, that may be a change in general thought as to what direction the town should go in. And we shouldn't be sitting there with a 2010 master plan that says one thing, and then public sentiment over the last 5 or 6 years that doesn't agree with that. You're going to have to, and you pointed that out earlier. Let me ask you a little bit about West Campus, because this seems to me, and again, I've come into this sort of toward the end, but as projects go, it seems to me to have been relatively well received by the community. Is that a fair statement, or am I missing something? I haven't heard a lot of opposition to that project. I had the developer on this show a couple of weeks ago, Mark Belansky, and of course you're dealing with a very experienced person and firm. They've done these things 100 times. They know what they're doing, and then they understand how to do proper outreach to the community and so forth. But my perception is that this project has been relatively well received, especially within the backdrop of what we were just talking about the last 5 years, where the sentiment seems to be moving away from developing. Do you want to comment on that?
I would say generally it's a fair statement. I only know what's in the public forum and the public realm. So maybe a month or so ago, someone must have told abutters and residents who live in that neighborhood to start sending letters and emails of support to planning board chair and select board chair. So that's likely where you're hearing about general support. I can't say officially, but I'm aware that there obviously are direct abutters who have concerns. Neither of the two major homeowners associations have taken a vote that I'm aware of. I'm not sure they've been asked to take a vote by their, by their board. So this process has been going on, as you know. It's been in planning board and select board agendas for 4 to 6 months.
So
And it's
educate
incrementally.
educate me as to why the select board is involved in this process.
Yeah, so the select board, the only reason the select board is involved in this is because this particular project is contemplating what's referred to as a development agreement. A development agreement, simply stated, is a public benefits package. And a development agreement is the legal document that codifies and binds the developer to the town on those promises related to public benefits.
Okay.
That the select board is the only legal entity in the town of Chelmsford who can sign a document such as that. That's why they're at the table as part of a negotiation.
So their participation, and I'm not trying to equate these things, but their participation would be similar to what they would do for a 40B LIP project.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Exactly. So so the select board being involved, I think, in development is new to Chelmsford. I think it took some time for members of the select board to understand that. How this all plays out, between now and getting to town meeting, we'll go through the normal protocols of finance committee hearings, select board hearings, planning board has a zoning hearing. Next Tuesday, November 30th, Trammell Crow is doing a public forum at the high school PAC.
Right.
So there's a lot going on. And I think between now and the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll likely have a much better idea related to how the direct neighborhood and community feels about the project.
Well, it's funny. I've been watching the meetings, and again, not being totally immersed in the detail, but it just as an observer watching the select board and the planning board meetings, it does seem that they're taking they're trying to do their due diligence. I'm talking about the select board now, and I've seen how they've addressed some of the issues with this particular development, and they're obviously very interested, and I think they do understand their role, and it does seem like they are trying to make sure that this project, whatever it is, and I think by now we know what it is, but that it will fit properly within the neighborhood with a minimum of disruptive impact to the abutters. I mean, I said to Mark when he was on the show, I said, look, I mean, that property is attractive, and I said, it's going to be developed. I mean, if anybody in town thinks that we're going to tear down school buildings and that thing's going to stay that way into perpetuity, forget it. It's going to be developed. So the only issue is, do you want single-family housing, which is what you could have now with the current zoning, or do you want a 40B, or do you want this or some variation thereof? And I think what may have sweetened the pot a little bit is the choice element of the project.
No question.
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
but this goes back to public sentiment and how the the elected officials could be or should be involved. As you said, I mean, something's going to happen there.
Right.
What's in front of the town for consideration in my opinion, provides the decision makers an opportunity to prescribe exactly what's going to happen, and in doing so, achieve significant public benefits. But that process requires a town to be enlightened, to understand that anytime a developer or investor comes into your town and wants to invest tens of millions of dollars while they're taking on all the risk, it should be viewed as an opportunity. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything.
And I think, and we've got like 30 seconds left, so we'll just wind it up. And I think what you just said is absolutely true. And again, what I've seen from, especially the select board, I think I've been paying a little bit more attention to them. It does seem that they understand that and they're taking that responsibility seriously, and they're not making light of it or turning it into a political football. So I think that's a good thing for the town, and hopefully we can see that process unfold. And Evan, we're out of time. thank you very much, and we'll have you back.
Thank you, that
because
sounds
we
good.
have not finished the
Look
conversation.
forward to it. Agreed. Thanks, Sam.